Welcome everyone to the Eckerson webinar, final one of the year. We are so glad that you're here today. It's one of our favorite webinars of the year where we get to take out our crystal ball and pontificate about the future. And one little change this year, because I know a lot of you see these predictions from many groups this time of year. So we'd like to do something a little different besides offering our own predictions from a slate of who's who in our industry. We want you to submit your prediction. And during the last 15 minutes of this webinar, we will collect those and we will discuss them as a group. So that is an exciting opportunity for you. So today, we are so thankful to have a who's who of gurus in this industry. These are folks that I lean on for information about what's really happening with data and analytics. So I'm so fortunate to have Dave Wells, former colleague here at Eckerson Group, trying really hard to retire over the years, not successfully. But Dave, thank you so much for being here. Elliot Cordo, one of our partners on the consulting side from Data Futures, as well as his colleague, Kim Herbert. Glad to have you guys here. Matthew Arellano, someone I really trust to know what's going on in the world of AI and ML. Thank you for being here, Matthew. Sean Hewitt and Alan Wishman, two of our own consultants here at Eckerson Group, working assiduously on a number of projects right now for us. Henrik Strandberg, we worked with earlier this year on data products, wrote a great white paper on that topic based on his own experience at a big publishing house. And then finally, James Serra, my deep throat when it comes to data architecture, written and published a really great book on data architecture, where it's been and where it's going. I recommend you guys all read that. And James, if you want to give a shameless plug on the title of that book, you're more than welcome to. A big crowd here, and made even bigger by all of you in the audience, because you're going to work with us to figure out what's going to happen next year and how to respond to it. So we have broken this webinar down into 4 parts. The first part is the most interesting one. I actually asked Fahad, our marketing person, who uses ChatGPT quite a bit, to use ChatGPT to see if it could create a prediction for this webinar in our article. And he actually created something that was kind of interesting and provocative. So we wanted to put that out there first and foremost, since we are in the age of Gen AI here. We want to see if it's really up to the task of simulating or emulating what we all do as industry experts, see if it can beat us at our own game, so to speak. Second, we will talk a lot about Gen AI and ML, because that was a big theme of the predictions that were submitted by our group of experts. Also, data governance was a big theme as well. And I know Sean and Kim were going to comment a lot on that. Plus, we had some I won't call them eyeball, but other types of predictions that we want to address. Then finally, as I said, we'll reserve the last 15 minutes for your predictions. So put your thinking cap on. This is your chance to tell us in the industry where you think things are going and what we should prepare for in 2025. All right, so let's see what ChatGPT came up with. So I thought this was kind of interesting. Their prediction was there will be the rise of something called the data responsibility platform. And I Googled that term. It does not exist. This is not a platform that any vendor sells, or if they sell something like it, they don't call it this. So this is a completely new term, which if you're an industry analyst like I've been for most of my career, you kind of get, quote unquote, paid for coming up with these new categories of tools and technologies so that you can educate the market about them. And I'll just read this very quickly. By 2025, organizations will pivot toward platforms explicitly designed to manage data ethics, accountability, and societal impact. These data responsibility platforms, or DRPs, will become the next frontier for enterprises offering tools to measure, monitor, and ensure responsible data usage alongside traditional analytics. The move to DRPs is driven by growing government regulation of data and AI, increased public concern about AI bias, surveillance, and misuse, and corporate risk management. Key features of a DRP include data lineage, auditing, AI impact scoring, privacy engineering, dashboards tailored to various stakeholders such as consumers, regulators, and executives. That's everything in the kitchen sink in there. Now, before I turn this over to our panel, I do have to say that this did not come out of ChatGPT on the first try. I asked Fahad, what did it take to create this prediction? And it took 15 prompts to refine the prediction. And he asked it to start to pretend it was like a Gartner analyst, right? An industry analyst, and speak in the voice of Wayne Eckerson, which I thought was interesting as well. So it did take a little bit of prompting, I would say a lot of prompting to come up with this. So that is context for this. So we're not only talking about the prediction, but also the capability of ChatGPT. So let me throw this to the panel, and let's start with Dave Wells, our resident expert on all things data and AI. Dave, what do you think?
I think it's quite an impressive collection of buzzwords. The cynic in me says it's probably not a realistic prediction. It's a prediction for something that doesn't exist, data responsibility platforms. It's trying to address monitoring and measurement and tracking of things that are poorly defined, such as ethics. So I think there's a real challenge in trying to turn this into something that is tangible and realistic. I think the essence of this that is somewhere on track is increased public concern about AI bias, surveillance, and misuse. Okay. I think those are very real. I think the rest of this sort of borders on what's come to be known as AI hallucinations.
So,
And
Dave, if that's your sense of your qualification of the prediction, what do you think this says about ChatGPT and its maturity at this point?
I think the reality is ChatGPT and all generative AI has real potential. It has potential to do good and it has potential to do harm. What that means is technology folks, as data folks, as business folks, as just individuals in society, we all have to learn to sort the noise and the nonsense from the nuggets that generative AI can give us. That's a process that's going to take a while to play itself out. And a lot of this is human factors and cultural.
Right.
Has little to do with technology. It's human factors and cultural. The thing that I see not sufficiently emphasized here, we get one brief mention of AI bias. And when I look at what's taking place in AI governance, there's a lot of focus on regulations, the EU AI Act, and regulatory compliance, and not much attention to bias. And when there is attention to bias, the talk is about model bias.
Right.
What about data bias?
Right.
So
All right. So that's it. So, Dave, that's a good segue to the next section when we get to Gen AI, because I know that was your prediction, right? So let's hold that. And let's let someone else from the panel talk about, one, what they thought about this prediction as a prediction, and two, what they think it says about the state of ChatGPT and LLMs.
Yeah, I guess I could take a crack at this, right? So first off, Dave, I enjoyed Dave's reaction to this prediction. I think there's some truth in the hallucination, right? There's a few things that that resonate in this, in terms of actual tangible concerns or gaps and kind of like the enterprise adoption of AI, right? So some of these things I wish were there, maybe like in terms of bias and maybe in terms of ethics. But what I do think about is, I do think about, which is an actual thing in kind of like enterprise AI adoption, is the application of guardrails, right? The application of observability into predictions, right? Especially as we start pushing AI to the customer, to the edge, closer to the product, right? Organizations are becoming more and more concerned with what AI is doing and what it's producing. They want to make sure it's on brand. They want to make sure it's not offensive. They want to make sure that if say it's image generation, that they're not violating any sort of user rights to the image, to the extent that the model produce something similar to something it was trained on, right? Or violated any sort of right to the image that it creates. Listen, there's I think there's going to be significant work in this space in terms of driving controls and observability around AI deployment in the enterprise for sure. I don't think there's going to be a thing called a DPR, and I don't think this represents one system, right? But there are some things here which are problems now, and problems that people are fixing. Fragmented tooling, technology, services that address different areas, right? But a lot more work to go. In terms of ChatGPT, yeah, I think it's amazing, and I think we're just at the beginning.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think this is pretty impressive given a little bit of time and a dozen prompts.
Yeah.
Definitely good for starting the conversation.
Right. Oh, listen, we have time for one more panelist to chime in on this prediction. Does anybody want to give it a shot?
I can take a shot at it. I think it makes a lot more sense if you replace the word platform with frameworks, and the concept of building a platform that does all of this is just so ludicrous. It makes me laugh. But when I look at the details, these are things that are important to a lot of companies right now. So trying to ensure responsible data usage, even ensure responsible data usage from a sustainability perspective, and looking at your environmental footprint of data processing, when you're building your AI models, all of that, AI bias, misuse, corporate risk. These are all fairly significant priorities to a lot of organizations right now, and they are being loosely managed. So I can see organizations pivoting to create frameworks or standardize how they're approaching these things. But yeah, a platform is completely unrealistic.
Yeah, that's a great insight, Sean. Thanks for that. So let's move on to the first grouping of predictions, which are about generative AI for the most part. So we got a lot of different thoughts here. So let's go one by one, and then we'll have a little follow-up after each one. So James, yours is the first. Gen AI will dominate structured data. What do you mean by that, and how will that reshape the way we approach data and analytics going forward?
Yeah, sure. I think we're all used to using ChatGPT or Copilot on text data in there, whether it's gathering information that's already on the internet, or which is all text, or uploading, say, PDF documents on that, and using that to help with the answer. What I see coming in the future, and we're starting to see a little bit of it now, is, well, I have all this data that's sitting in databases that could be used to help answer a question on that, whether it's using that solely, or more likely you're going to use that structured data, that data sitting in databases, which could be numbers and text, along with documents. Think of the difference between the structured data sitting in databases and unstructured data sitting in documents there, and using both in combination to get better answers. A good use case for this would be, think in healthcare. If you have a patient and there's a bunch of data that's unstructured, it's doctor's notes, it's written lab reports, and you want to come up with a treatment for this person, well, you can feed in those documents to a large language model, but imagine also sending in data that's in a relational database. It could be some information about demographics or medications or certain treatments that are all structured. And you want to use that in combination with those documents, those PDF documents, to come up with a great treatment plan. And there's, imagine every scenario that's similar where you want to combine the data in relational databases. And this is, I see it now because there's a lot of customers are not thinking about using both. And I say, well, don't you have all this relevant information in a structured database? And they go, yeah, that actually would be helpful in helping answer it. And you can kind of do this now. If you're using, say, ChatGPT, you can go to a relational database, export the data out into a CSV file, and then upload it along with the PDF documents and ask a questions on it. And we're starting to see customers now that are building front-end interfaces that behind the scenes will automatically go to the database and pull out the information and send it to the large language model along with the documents. So I just see that happening more and more. And Microsoft is in some of their products are coming up with ways to do that, like within Microsoft Fabric, they've been called AI skills. However, that's only doing part of it. It's allowing, and just like Power BI has Copilot, and now you can ask English questions and convert it into SQL, and then it'll run that SQL and pull back the answers on that. But imagining combining all that with unstructured data and documents now to come up with better answers. That's what I mean by that.
So, James, when ChatGPT 3.0 came out, it could not like interrogate tables, right? Structured data. And you said when you started that we're starting to move in that direction, and you just gave some examples. I mean, can it, or do you see it natively reading rows and columns without having to export it to CSVs and so forth?
Right now, there's, unless you code it, write some Spark code or something to do that behind the scenes and interface through APIs with ChatGPT, with Copilot. The interface right now won't do that. You can upload CSV files, but you can't say, go and grab this data from a database on that. I think that you may see that in the future, and Fabric with AI skill is sort of halfway there. But it's just recently, maybe within the last 6 months, that ChatGPT and Copilot have allowed you to upload CSV files. And in fact, I give a demo now to customers and publicly where, hey, let's use,
I think we
take
lost
these
James.
rows and go out there and supplement them all. So there's a lot you can do with it now, but it's all through external CSV reports, files that you're uploading.
Great. Well, thanks, James. I probably should mention that James works for Microsoft, but he's the most nonpartisan Microsoft person that we've met, and I rely on him for unbiased, unvarnished information about what's working and what's not working, both within and without side of the Microsoft ecosystem. So thank you, James, for that. So let's move on for the sake of time. So Elliot, you're up next. You have this also pretty provocative prediction that AI will kill ML. Tell us what's going on there. I mean, we're just starting to get used to ML and starting to leverage it, at least at some of the bigger companies.
Yeah, like it's maybe a little provocative, and it was written to be provocative. But I'll tell you, something which I see going on, or at least the trajectory over the past year, right? It started in the startup world, and we have clients that are startups. We like to work with startups. And what we found is that largely they were being very crafty and using, generative AI models as substitutions for traditional ML techniques and their applications, driven by two big reasons. One, being on the wrong side of large data moats, right? So as we all know, to train accurate ML models, you need tons and tons of, or a lot of labeled data, high quality labeled data, right? Startups are often on the wrong side of that they don't have tons of data, let alone high quality labeled data, right? And the other was the skill gap, right? Like that, like, okay, it's a lot of work. Like that process from, training to feature engineering to parameter tuning to, model selection, testing, ML ops, all of that is like a lot of work, right? So the trend was that many people started using LLMs for tasks that ML would generally be employed, right? Classification, right? Tagging, summarization, feature extraction, right? LLMs aren't perfect, but if you've ever trained an ML model, your success criteria is generally that it's right more often than wrong, right? And just saw like amazing things being done in this community by people, leveraging AI models, being like hacks, right? So what I've seen in the past few months is that enterprises are catching on. So even working in like large organizations, like data science teams, largely starting to divert their tool of choice to pre-train large language models versus trying to build from scratch, right? Sometimes a data moat problem, even in large organizations, you might have lots of data, but not high quality labeled data, right? In other cases, just productivity, right? Them being able to, take on more problems that they would have left on the table just due to bandwidth, right? And solving them without LLMs. And obviously there's a lot of challenges to this approach, right? Ranging from, hallucination to accuracy to, the cost effectiveness of deploying the solutions, right? There are techniques to mitigate the latter, but just a large offset from traditional ML development in terms of AI being chosen as the solution for many problems that I'm seeing. And hey, we're using it in our toolbox too. So a lot of our data pipelines, or I'd say a fair amount of our data pipelines, especially the really interesting problems to solve, have little mini agentic flows within them where we're using ML AI models for reasoning and resolution of certain things we need to do. So anyway, I don't know if that was as provocative as the tagline, but seeing movement and adoption, a lot of movement, a lot of adoption, and a lot of, most importantly, success. We're
Yeah.
seeing success.
Well, that's fascinating. We've worked with clients that it just seems like such a gargantuan lift to get an ML model built and deployed,
Yeah.
that this might be a great alternative. But my question is really this just for the low hanging fruit? Because would a company ever entrust Gen AI to like replace its recommendation algorithm or its forecasting algorithm?
Well, yeah, it depends on the problem space. So like Gen AI is not replacing forecasting. There's a lot of, you think about like the Facebook released Profit, which is quick converging, is like, one of the best and easiest to use forecasting models out there. So I think certain problem spaces, the traditional ML solutions definitely work, and definitely at the scale that certain companies, need to deploy, right? It's just not
Mhm.
cost effective.
Yeah.
But the general cases, which are not that, right, within organizations where they need to classify something or predict the number or assign some labels, right? Gen AI does a pretty good job.
Yeah. Great, great. All right, so we're going to move on. This has been fascinating. I do want to remind our audience that please get your own predictions and put them in the chat, and we'll get to them at the end here. All right, so let's move on. Matt, you're up next. Rise of chatbot gateways. This is something that I've been thinking about for a long time. There's going to be too many chatbots out there within an organization, and that's a risk issue. And how do you mitigate that? How do you architect for ChatGPT and other chatbots? So take it away, Matt. Tell us what you're thinking here.
Yeah, thanks, Wayne. I think the first thing most important, I think the gateway concept is really going to be born on the back of the data responsibility platform. I'm just kidding. Given that that's not a thing, but we can converge those topics. But I think what we're trying to get to here is that companies are going to be implementing this gateway concept to manage this bi-directional flow between the chatbot, content generators, knowledge management systems to ensure a couple things: minimum data loss, maximizing ground truth, which I think is hard, right? But obviously things of which we need to do to ensure the value and the accuracy of the response, and then just enhance governance across these AI systems. But the problem statement that we're getting to is, as you think about the enterprise and this proliferation that's going on, you can somewhat pair it to the rise of BI tools in the 90s and 2000s. But you're going to have multiple modes that an enterprise will have to deal with, and how these chat interfaces will arrive. And one will be your core applications, so your Salesforce, SAP, Oracle, Workday. It's all going to have its own chat interface, which may or may not use the governed LLM of which you've kind of sanctioned within the firm. That's the first risk. Second is you'll build your own chat interface, right, to solve specific problems. Hopefully that'll be on a unified Gen AI architecture within the firm, so it's kind of governing the model closely and managing the data. Third, you'll work with third parties, right? Third parties that are kind of building specialized interfaces, solving business problems, of which they'll be housing some of your data, right? James mentioned some of the structured pieces. You might be sending structured data to them. So not only do you have these multiple applications that are now, housing your data and ultimately responding, you're going to have to think about the different governance approaches that are applied for the internalization and externalization, right? So how do you govern data loss protection when you're dealing with Microsoft 365 Copilot is going to be drastically different than how you support it when an external customer, supporting external customer queries. So I think, you're going to see more and more this concept of a gateway. So while there's these multiple models, you're going to need this gateway concept that, ultimately sits in between, that helps control risk, control leakage, and ensure that ground truth, as I mentioned, right? So the relevance, the faithfulness, and the retrieval relevance, right? And I think it'll almost be this gateway agent concept, right? That really helps to kind of be the arbiter of what model should help to resolve each of the questions. And again, that just means that these external models need to then hit the gateway, and internally you need to kind of use this as that centralized arbiter. So we're starting to see this come about a little bit in industry, but I just think if you're using multiple models, if you're working internal and external, and you have these large scale applications, Salesforce kind of having their own underlying embedded, it's going to be this kind of proliferation that will need control. And I hope, this concept of gateway kind of takes a hold, because I think it's going to be the only way that we can ensure those governance procedures, as I mentioned, but even more so, really give comfort that the response is grounded and it's validated for a consumer.
Yeah, this one really resonated with me because we did see the proliferation of BI tools and spread marts and data marts, and no single version of truth, undermining what we were all about in the data warehousing space. And I got the sense that we're heading down that same path with Gen AI and all these copilots. So how does this work? Just quickly, because we got to keep moving on. This means that there's only one chat bot that everyone goes to, and that function of that chat bot is to evaluate the question, then funnel it to the right copilot or chatbot elsewhere in the organization, and then all the copilots go away as a result.
No, I wish there was an enterprise, the Oz behind the screen, if you will. But I think you're going to live in a world where there will be multiple chatbots, right? There will be interfaces somewhat all over the place. The gateway will help you kind of be the arbiter of how the question comes in, and ultimately what do we utilize to respond to it, right? So which model, and ultimately the data, and then help you understand, right, what model was used, and ultimately certify the response. So I think we're going to live in a world, Wayne, where there will be multiple chat interfaces, unfortunately. But think of it as air traffic control, right, between the question and ultimately the resolution of that question, whether you're utilizing kind of unstructured or structured, and kind of James's narrative around, the model, and some of the data that resides inside of an enterprise.
Right. So I'll assume then that every application will maintain its co-pilot because you can't really rip those
Correct.
out. But
Correct.
for like domain specific chatbots that a company builds, you will have a gateway to those domain chatbots. Is that kind of what you're
That's
thinking?
exactly right. Yeah,
Okay.
that's the vision what we have.
All right, cool. All right, thank you, Matt. That was fascinating. And now to Alan, you're bringing up a whole new world of models that I've never heard of before. These neurosymbolic models. Tell us what they are and how they'll be better than the current state of LLMs.
Hi, Wayne, everyone. So a neurosymbolic model is they're models that are different in that they use logical data connections as opposed to mathematical probabilities that are multiplied to the nth degree, which is what a traditional transistor model, mathematical breakdown, and neural networking, how that works. So it can actually use logic to make predictions. And the thing about how it uses that logic, similar to the way the human mind works, which is why the nomenclature is what it is it's actually traceable. You can actually see and show what logic was used to produce a prediction or an outcome of a prompt. And for that reason, as these models are developed, and they're really more small language models than large language models, so I don't think that they will ever necessarily replace, the usefulness of an LLM. They're really more tuned to specific use cases where because of how they use that logic, you can train them for specific use cases that need that traceability, that need that sort of provability. Matt just mentioned, a certifiable outcome. And that was an interesting statement because for industries like healthcare, pharmaceutical testing, other highly regulated industries that would probably really like to use more artificial intelligence advantages, but they're not provable. It's more of a black box. These models are more trainable with their data in things like think of a digital twin from a genetic modeling standpoint, as well as pharmaceutical testing. You could actually potentially accelerate drastically medicines and medical applications that would help people. Where today, if there's an outcome or a prediction or an outcome from a model, you can't prove how it got there, which is some of the challenges.
It sounds like this is going to be a great way to create those very narrow domain specific models that are explainable, right? That can be certified by a regulatory agency if need be.
That's absolutely one of the advantages, right? And like everything, it's got advantages and disadvantages. So for specific use cases that require speed and specific data sets for those use cases, these are pretty appealing. The other thing that's important about these is in training your own, use specific model, they're on the order of about 100 times less expensive and faster to train than your typical LLM or even standard transformer-based small language model. So big advantage there.
Now, last question quickly. Are these a reality today? Are they being used or is it just still in the lab?
They're in development and in various degrees of usage. Microsoft is developing these. Google is developing them. There's a few small companies that are kind of in startup or budding stages that are really working to develop these because of the very compelling cost, speed advantages, as well as traceability that we just don't have today with AI.
Excellent. All right. Thank you, Alan. Again, very fascinating. And now we move to Henrik. A very down-to-earth, practical application of Gen AI. You believe that almost all job interviews will be conducted with a Gen AI agent or chatbot. Where did you get that? And what are the implications for jobs?
Yeah, so I picked this topic as an illustration of the trend that I'm actually seeing, but maybe it sounds a little less sexy. My actual prediction is that we during 25 we will grow to trust AI in a way that we haven't really historically, and we will trust it to actually drive real process and business transformation rather than just facilitating or optimizing the process steps that we go through in our day jobs in enterprise management today. So I picked this particular one about job interviews because it always triggers good conversations about what we actually want AI to do for us, right? So the high level concept of this, and I didn't make this up by myself, by the way, that these applications already exist. So this not as outlandish as you might think. But the basic concept here is like, rather than have an applicant tracking system filter out, weed out job applications based on keywords, and thereby narrow down maybe 1,000 applicants for a position down to 15 that would get an actual phone screen with a human. Why not just let the conversational AI, the chatbot, do that initial phone screen as a conversation for thousands? Why limit ourselves to thousands? Why not millions of candidates, right? We can interview an unlimited number of people for this position. We can not rate them on merit, what degrees you have or what certificates you've completed, but your actual factual responses. An AI can easily detect your sentiments. It can detect if you're reading from a script, if you're Googling the answers while you're chatting, et cetera, et cetera. It can be completely neutral to your gender, your geographical location, even your accent in the language you're speaking. So in some ways, you can see how, yes, this could facilitate a process step that today might be perceived as a little bit of bottleneck, right? I think everyone on this call have struggled sometimes with getting enough candidates through the pipeline. And once we actually get to talk to them, we realize that probably only 10% of them are actually what we were looking for. So this is something that could improve our lives dramatically, not just, by the way, in our professional lives, but also when you're looking for a contractor to repaint your house, or all sorts of gig economy style interactions. I think obviously we all have some serious concerns about this, but I believe that in 25 we'll start shifting the conversation a little bit away from this, how AI and the AI applications can just make our lives easier, to actually transform the way that we get stuff done.
Yeah, and I think part of this transformation is going to be accelerated through this agentic AI, right? Where it can not only just do one task, but string together multiple tasks to achieve an objective you have. Like maybe it is, hiring a candidate for this open position, right? So they can screen people, and then, they can move that process along to, screening the finalists, right?
And as a business owner, your job is to create shareholder or company value, business value. If you can identify talent very quickly, very cheaply, and very easily, and you can also onboard them relatively quickly, regardless where they are in the world, like, why wouldn't you, right? This concept, we've already seen, like the engagement models shift away from full-time staff and employees over to more gig economy and consulting basis. Process transformations like these will enable us to kind of accelerate and hypercharge those types of like real societal transformations in a way that I believe, that's my prediction. We'll start having more conversations like that in 25, rather than just considering AI as something that will get the same stuff done faster and cheaper.
Right. Well, I think you're alluding to something else here. I mean, a lot of people are terrified by Gen AI because it will take away jobs. But I think in this scenario, it's not going to replace jobs. It's going to do the heavy lifting that enables a person or a team or a department to do a hell of a lot more with the same number of people. Right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Wayne, I just want to chime in on this a little bit because there is a governance implication to this. So anytime you are implementing something that is automating decision-making involving people, you need to be able to demonstrate the rigorous governance you have around it, and that there is no bias involved, because you are giving the AI the ability to make decisions about people's futures and their suitability for positions. And most modern privacy regulations are very strict about this, and it needs to be tightly governed. So yeah, it would be great to see that happen, where we can improve the hiring process and streamline that, but there is some overhead that comes with it. You need to have strong governance in place to support that.
Well, that's well said, and a good segue, because you might just be swapping one set of biases for another, right? let's go on to the governance predictions. That was a big bulk of what people were talking about. And Dave, you kind of already touched on the data bias, and given what Sean just said, I think your prediction kind of reinforces that, right?
Yeah, it very much does. And I don't know how much this is a prediction and how much it's a hope, but I see the AI governance attention when it does look at bias, looking at model bias, underlying all of these sophisticated and powerful models and algorithms, everything's built on data. And if we don't pay attention to the data, we're going to get it wrong.
Yeah.
So what we've traditionally done in data quality management is look at correctness, integrity, and usability. We have to add a fourth category to data quality management, and that's objectivity. Objectivity is lack of bias. And we have to figure out what are the indicators of bias. We have to figure out how to detect bias. We have to figure out how to measure bias, monitor bias, and perform root cause analysis when bias is discovered. So this prediction really is less about governance and AI and about data quality management. And I really believe if we don't pay attention to the data, none of this other stuff matters.
Absolutely. Kim, you're a data governance expert. Do you have any follow-up questions or comments on this prediction?
It's interesting hearing, and I've been reflecting a little bit on the idea that, or the fact that ChatGPT responded with this DRP platform as it's the big prediction, the big recommendation for 25 out of all of the other options. And, for me, I tend to look at everything through a governance lens. And for me, governance is very much about the nuts and bolts of returning to tried and true management principles, responsibility, accountability, ownership, clear processes and handoffs. And so the idea of bias and having to understand where bias may lay, you push that back and that gets to, what kind of people and infrastructure and support. When I say infrastructure, I'm talking about organizational support do you have to invest in managing bias, identifying it. What does it even mean for your particular company in that scenario? That's a really heavy lift for a lot of companies. And for so much of what I'm hearing, and it's interesting because it's so forward looking. And yet with so many of my clients in the past, they're still trying to play catch up, and they're still struggling with basic data literacy. And what does that mean to business owners, and how do they get involved? And people who originate the data, how are they able to take a more active role in the care and feeding, the management, the sharing of that to the eventual consumers of that data? And it's, in my experience, it's always been connecting those dots is a lot of work that is oftentimes overlooked. So I love that, even though DRPs don't exist, I love that that was one of the things that came up, Yeah. I agree. A framework, like any of the other governance frameworks we're well familiar with, is not an unreasonable approach to try to integrate some of these concepts of compliance, bias detection, general management. So in my mind, hearing all of this is just another evolution, or it is the evolution of data governance to something that is truly much more holistic and sort of raising the expectation for what that function, what that capability means for organizations.
Perfect. Let's move on to data contracts. This was another one from you, Elliot. I've been hearing a lot about data contracts as well. What is the state of them, and what's your prediction here?
Yeah, so those that know me, I'm on a long standing crusade to kind of elevate data and data engineering, having a background in software engineering. So we've all had a lot of like data mesh excitement over the past few years, right? And I think that one of the good things that shook out of it was re-raising this concept of applying good software engineering principles to data. Data doesn't have to be just different, because when it is, it's generally the things that plague us, right? Which include tight coupling. It includes broken data pipelines. It includes unknown downstream consumers of data, which just hobble you from progress, right? So over the past couple of years, the concept of a data contract has become more mainstream. Tooling has developed, right? As you guys know, DBT has started to take over the world of ELT and become very prominent in many of the projects that we do, right? They've been a big proponent of contract language, right? And I'm seeing that it's started to become part of the definition of done in many of the DBT projects that we work on, and many of the companies that we consult with. They want it as a best practice. They want it as part of the completed work, right? Knowing that they get the benefits of basically protecting their data, right? Their data pipelines and their data ecosystem. And they're not alone. There's also like an open standard that's been developed, ODSC, which I think, when you get those sort of things, it kind of makes me think about the same standards that have been applied to API development, right? In terms of how we specify them and how we share those specifications. So I think we're still in like the adoption phase, but I just think there's huge momentum, and I feel this year we'll see more adoption. In the next few years, it'll just be commonplace and something that everybody's talking about as part of their architecture. So yeah.
Right. So these contracts are actually based on YAML code, right? So when you say, we need to protect our data pipelines, you're basically saying there's a contract in place. So if the data pipeline breaks, we know why it's broken and we can repair it. Is that what?
Yeah, I think an easy to understand modality is the idea, like a contract's a contract, just like an API contract. So you can make one, you can go out there and put it out there and say, hey, this is our contract, right? But the durability and the safety comes in from testing, right? So testing and contracts come hand in hand. So as a producer of data implements a contract, their responsibility becomes that they actually test the contract when they make changes to their system, right? So anybody who has decided to use that contract, rely upon that contract, will have a degree of safety that whatever they're relying on is not going to break, right? Opposed to what we generally do as data people is we reach into some database, some unknown database, a backlog we don't control, some team that we rarely talk to, and what happens? They change their database and everything breaks, right? Yeah. So I think, long story short, it's not just a contract, but it's also the tooling and the best practices about creating tests, right, to prove that the contracts are upheld as systems go through change and evolution.
So data contracts are an integral part of a data product, which has that implicit guarantee to the recipient of the product that this is going to be delivered as promised each and every time. Yeah.
Yeah,
Perfect.
each and every time, and they test for it, right? It's your responsibility to make sure you don't break your contract.
Are the tests built into the contract, or are they just assumed that you're going to build those tests to live up to the?
Yeah, so there's automated testing to test the spec of the contract, but I generally think of the the real safety coming from a comprehensive suite of tests that test on many axes of data quality, right, and contract adherence. But there is some basic out of the box testing that is enabled in DBT simply by using contracts, and also as part of the ODSC suite. So there's some baseline stuff built in.
Great, cool. That was very fascinating. All right, we're gonna go to this third one by Sean, and then we're going to go to the user predictions because Michael's not here. He's our data monetization expert. And then you hear enough from me anyway, so we'll leave mine off. So Sean, take it. We've heard a lot about quantum computing in the news this week. So what's your prediction?
Well, definitely. I wanted to focus on something else because like the panelists here, most organizations are very much focused on AI and don't realize that quantum computing is sitting in their blind spot. And we only have 5-7 years before this becomes a problem. And a lot of the current protocols for encryption will not be safe. And organizations need to start thinking now, coming up with a plan now as to how they are going to migrate from their current security protocols to quantum resilient protocols. NIST has been working for the last 10 years to come up with some realistic standards, and they're starting to put out some standards now, things like digital signatures and just general cryptography. But it's going to take a while before there's standards in place for all forms of encryption. So if organizations who are a little slower to get things done don't start thinking about this now, they're going to be caught off guard and they're going to have some significant problems.
Yeah, I'm glad you said it's going to take another 5 to 7 years for quantum computing to catch on, because the news this week came from Google, and they came out with a quantum chip that evidently passed some error detection threshold, so that as the number of qubits, which are fundamental component of quantum computing, grows, the errors have always grown with it, right? So now they've created this chip where you can add qubits, whereas the errors don't grow exponentially with the power of the computing. So yeah, but it's not anywhere close, unless you think 5 to 7 years is close.
Well, for some companies it is at the speed they move. It will take them a decade just to get their house in order. But what you have to keep in mind is, although we're not going to see quantum computing at the point where it can crack the some of the more advanced encryption currently used, the part of the risk is that if some of these if some of the hackers are capturing information now that they can decrypt later with quantum computing, there is some risk there, right?
Interesting.
Yeah. So looking at what we're doing now and making sure that if we lose some of that information now, even if it's encrypted, does that pose a risk if somebody has the ability to decrypt that later?
Okay, perfect. Well, listen, we have a few minutes left, and we do have one prediction from one of our attendees. So I'm going to stop sharing here and read you this prediction, and anyone on the panel can chime in here. So it's from Mark Ashford, and he says, ELT is moving to low code, no code. Metadata on the data lakehouse will guide data forward. Data streaming will, I guess these are multiple predictions. Data streaming will be the most important architecture. Augmented intelligence will facilitate data automation. Well, let's just start with that first one. ELT is moving to low code, no code. I guess there's been a lot of work. A trend in the last 5-10 years has been coding in our ELT in Python. Maybe we're swinging back towards GUI-based development tools. What do you guys think about that?
I'll go real quick, but I think it's going to follow a similar arc to other software disciplines, right? We're already seeing it, right? LLMs and agents can write SQL too, right? So I just see assist, right? And it's going to be a productivity boost. And we might reach that day where we have to basically only describe the problem and rely on the metadata within the database. But, I think in the near and present future, we're just going to see it as I think the industry average, and which is advertised by many of these co-pilots, is 30-40%, and I think I see 30 to 40% by using co-pilots to write code right now. So I think we'll see that percentage increase. Yeah, we could end up somewhere really interesting in the next few years. We'll see what that is. I don't know what a guy like me who likes to write code will do.
Anybody want to get the last word before we close down?
I'll wrap it up really concisely, Wayne. I think Elliot, you're pretty spot on. I think there's going to be standard cases where low code, no code is easy. It's faster for organizations to get time to insights, time to money. There's always going to be some corner cases where you're going to need some skills. Maybe not always, but probably for quite some time, where you need someone that can go in and really do that firsthand analysis and understand what needs to be done, and then write their own code.
Well, listen, we are at the top of the hour. I really, really want to thank our panelists for joining us today. This was a fun discussion, a lot of interesting, provocative thoughts. You guys are my deep throat when it comes to understanding what's really going on in the industry. So thank you so much for coming together all at once to discuss these things. And we'll have to do this more often. And I want to thank our audience for listening in and submitting some predictions. So thank you all. And if we don't talk, have a wonderful holiday season.